The idea of the Innovation Campus in Saldanha Bay has been brewing in our minds for years, and our passion to bring it to life remains unwavering. Our dream is that the Saldanha Bay Innovation Campus is a meeting of hearts and of minds, and collectively creating a better future for the local energy and maritime sectors. Our hope is that it evokes a fresh sense of possibility and inspires us to push beyond our perceived boundaries into the art of the impossible.
My name is Adinda Prella, and it's a pleasure to host you today. I head up our transaction and investor portfolio at the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. I'm also one of the program directors of the Saldanha Bay Innovation Campus implementation team. We want to create a platform for collaboration and to foster innovation between academia, industry, community, government, and thought leaders. Today is our second episode, and we are exploring innovation a bit more. What is innovation? How do you actually implement it? And is it actually within reach of anyone and everyone? On the show today is Davis Cook. He heads up RISE, the Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability. And we're going to explore the definition of innovation through a bit more of a commercial lens. Davis, hi. Please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, Adinda, and thank you for having me on the show. And hello to all of you out there. So as mentioned, my name is Davis. I work for an organization called RISE, the Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability. We are a boutique consulting firm that focuses on building innovation clusters and ecosystems, working mainly across South and Southern Africa, and have been quite closely involved in, amongst others, the energy and maritime sector. So really looking forward to today's podcast.
Thank you, Davis. So to set the scene for our listeners, we are super excited for you to join us on this, I would say, very much innovative approach itself for us. Who would have thought 1 year down the line for the Innovation Campus that we'd actually be recording a series of podcasts? And it really also just speaking to being adaptive. Davis, we would like to explore more the commercial lens of innovation. And we are aware that RISE has partaken in many different sort of activities or exploring innovation from a commercial sense. What is your definition of innovation?
Thanks, Adinda. It's a really great question. And in our view, there isn't really one answer. So the academics will have a particular view on innovation being defined as some sort of creative destruction of, business processes. We try and think of it really just as finding better ways of doing things that you already do. And I think what's important here is that it's not just about, one individual finding some new technology or new process, but is rather about this new way of doing things being adopted by more people. So if I happen to be a hermit living somewhere and I find one way of doing things that's better than everyone else, that's invention, right? That's not real innovation. But when that way of doing things is adopted globally or within an industry, that really is the key definition for us of what innovation is. It's changing the way that people and society solve their problems in ways that are more efficient, that create more value, and that have more impact.
I like what you mentioned there. It's a way of doing things. How would, other than just sort of having an umbrella term for innovation, are there actually different types of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there are maybe three broad ways that we certainly look at this. So the first is around the pace at which innovation happens. And the traditional kind of difference here is that you have incremental innovation. So these are very, very small changes that would happen on a day-to-day basis. And this is something that was common, in organizations like Toyota, which would make tiny changes in their production system, on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. But over time, these changes accumulate so that in a year or 2 years, there is a fundamentally different way that they operate. In a sense, this incremental innovation is very close to the idea of evolution. There's no individual difference between myself and my parents and going backwards, but certainly over 1 million years, there is that change. So this is the idea of incremental innovation. The second way of looking at that is real disruptive work. And these are the kind of major paradigms that we would see in terms of the introduction of electricity or the introduction of computer technology. These ideas so fundamentally change the way that the world works that they disrupt everything. And so there isn't a slow change in how we do things, but a very, very rapid change. So incremental versus disruptive, this is one important distinction. I think the other thing that is, the other type of innovation that we're interested in, or the other variations, speaks to what is it that you are doing better. So certainly there are engineering and science-led innovations. In the world of biotechnology, you could be looking at something called CRISPR, which helps us to kind of manipulate DNA more effectively. The development and evolution of mobile phones or 5G networks, these are kind of engineering-led processes. There are also some very important innovations in the sense of business models. And here we see really clever applications of existing technologies in ways that hadn't been thought of before. And so if we think of something like Airbnb, the real genius for Airbnb is not a technology solution, because the technology that they used was pretty well established. But the way that they put these pieces together in terms of the business model and the commercial value that they were creating, that was unique and became an amazing sort of outcome for them. You can also look at this in terms of social or impact-led innovations. So this is where you, again, are looking at changing the way that you interact with different people, with different communities, and really pursuing things that have to do with human interactions as opposed to necessarily the technology that enables them. So these things are all important forms of innovation, and depending on the kind of organization that you are and how you create value in the world, the focus area for you on these different innovations is, can be very, very different.
Those are all really good examples. Let's try and apply that to the maritime and energy sector. And just by tackling the three categories or the three types of innovation that you mentioned, and let's see if we can come up with good examples for our listeners. The first one that you mentioned was incremental or innovation, or really the pace of innovation. And I'm immediately thinking, let's say, day-to-day activities, especially sort of process-driven activities. Immediately my mind goes to, I think, in a ship repair environment, it could come down to how are you efficiently managing your inventory and your spare parts? What do you think?
Sure. So that's a really good example that you kind of raised there. So if we look at production environment, in terms of how we manage ship repairs, there are almost certain to be 100 different tiny incremental innovations that you can make. There is image recognition that will help in terms of managing stockpiles. So it doesn't require a significant change in the way that you operate, but instead of having an individual or a person move out to count some of the stock, you are able to use some sort of artificial intelligence, image recognition software to do that on your behalf. So the job itself remains the same, right? We have equipment that needs to be counted in a particular area, and instead of doing this manually, you're able to do that through some automated fashion. So the job remains the same, but the way that you do that is augmented and enhanced through technology. That kind of process is not going to fundamentally change the efficiency of the business. It won't lead to a 30% improvement in operational productivity, but it may very well lead to a 0.1% improvement in that particular division. And as you start adding these things, it all adds up over time. And there are ways around looking in terms of what does your shift management cycles look like on site? How do you keep track of and manage fuel usage? Do you put in place the right kind of energy management systems? These are all small incremental changes in the way that you do things, but they ultimately lead to big changes in the overall performance of the business. I think from a different perspective, if we think of disruption, I'll speak about two big areas for disruption that I've seen in the shipping industry. So the first, in fact, is, in my view, one of my favorite stories around disruptive innovation, and I think is probably the most, or at least one of the most disruptive technologies that has ever been introduced in the history of mankind, which is going to be quite surprising. And that is the 20-foot container. So prior to the early 1970s, there were no standardized shipping containers. And everything was done by traditional stevedores packing equipment into ships. And it was only with the development of a standardized shipping container that we have what we understand to be the modern shipping world. So building a box is not a complicated engineering feat, but it was the foresight of the people who did this that fundamentally changed how we operate as a maritime industry. And the implications on that from a cost perspective were to drive the costs of shipping down literally by an order of magnitude. And there's a fascinating book called The Box, which talks about this history, and it really shifted everything. And that kind of gives a comparison of disruption versus incremental.
David, it was a very unexpected example of a shipping container and something we take so for granted. Thank you. I just learned something there. And then maybe just to make a full circle on the last type of innovation around doing better, especially when it comes to the advances in science, I immediately think of advances, let's say, in material science, which allows vessels and components now to be lighter, to be 3D printed, really just being a game changer in the industry as well. I was fortunate to be on a site visit in 2019 in Aberdeen, where we visited a lab where they 3D printed Christmas trees. And a Christmas tree is a type of flow restrictor that's used subsea oil and gas installations. But absolutely fascinating to see those advances. And yeah, it's sometimes just by doing something better.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just follow on that, I mean, I think the world of additive manufacturing, 3D printing, is still kind of in its infancy at the moment. But we've started seeing, by parallel, in some work that we're doing in other extractive industries, that there are metal 3D printers being utilized, for example, in underground mining environments, so that when they need to replace a particular component of some equipment, they don't have to sort of run it through a warehouse on surface, but they can just produce the equipment right there. And this kind of ability to hold essentially an infinite amount of equipment on, whether it's an offshore base or, an offshore rig, or to be able to go out, for example, to an offshore wind platform, realize that you need a new part, and you just quickly 3D print it there on the boat, completely changes the way that inventory management can happen in the sector. So, the technologies around this are phenomenal and constantly evolving and changing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Davis. I would love to explore what you've mentioned as well around the social impact of innovation, and perhaps also drawing from the other cluster work that Reece has been doing. Do you maybe have some examples on how can you use innovation to have a social impact? or to change people's lives for the better?
Sure. So I think that there are two elements to this. The one is, of course, the impact that you can have through your products and your impact of what you do. So if you are an energy company, yes, you're able to produce energy, but doing so in a carbon neutral way ultimately has broad social impact. And I think that innovations to achieve this kind of zero carbon emissions energy is in and of itself socially relevant innovation. But I think that is largely driven from the engineering side. I think what I'm hearing is more asking about how do you, in terms of your community engagement and how you interact with communities as a business, how do you rethink that? And I think that this is a really important topic. We've certainly seen over the last several years that there has been an increasing focus on environmental, social, and governance issues from a range of stakeholders, so ESG issues. We have the world's largest fund manager, BlackRock, has recently released a new statement saying that they will essentially review all investments according to a set of kind of very strict ESG criteria. There have certainly been a number of incidents, particularly in the extractive industry over the last couple of years, that have shaken the trust of many people in these large organizations. And I think that the question here is not around how do you kind of build some new tech to make people happy, but how do you deeply rethink the relationship that you have with the stakeholders that exist in and outside of your business. And I think firstly, it's important to understand that all businesses have people that work for them. Those people have families that often live in and around those businesses. And there are communities and value chains that support that broader kind of ecosystem. And I think this is particularly the case for organizations in the primary and secondary industries. So mining, agriculture, oil and gas extraction, manufacturing, energy utilities, and the like. And when you start saying that you as a company are one part of this broader ecosystem and value chain, it becomes quite important for you to think, how do you operate effectively within that? And how do you do so in a way that builds a social license to operate? Now, this term around social license to operate is quite commonly used within the mining sector, but it basically says, if you are able to build a healthy and positive relationship with the communities within which you operate, there are going to be a huge number of really positive outcomes for you. You are likely to find greater employee engagement in your company. You are likely to find better skills to bring in. You are likely to build a more vibrant and effective value chain in and around the work that you do. Your relationship with important stakeholders such as local, municipal, kind of or provincial or state level government is likely to be better. And so all of these parts of the business or these elements that affect the business in terms of how easy it is to do business will be massively enhanced through a healthy and positive relationship with the people that you walk past on a day-to-day basis. And that really is the heart of this idea of social innovation from a corporate point of view, is not about, throwing a couple million rand or dollars into a corporate social responsibility project, but is around fundamentally thinking, how do I build a healthy relationship with the people that we walk past on a day-to-day basis? And in doing so, recognizing that in and of itself will have a positive impact on your business operations, production, and all of your kind of core commercial metrics.
Wow. Innovation just feels like such an obvious thing to do. And yet it's actually also just so daunting. Like, we all hear those buzzwords like innovation, but when you break it down like that, hey, like, why are we just not doing it? But Davis, then that asks the question, how do you start to foster innovation within a greater industry?
So I think that really is a question of finding out those areas that everyone can benefit from. So it is always up to an individual company whether they want to invest money into R&D and taking the risk associated with innovation. I think at an industry level, however, there are a number of potential challenges that can only be resolved from an industry perspective. And these are things such as, what does the policy and the regulation look like that affects the entire industry? And specifically, I'm talking about it in regards to intellectual property development and innovation and so on. A common area could be, are we entitled to tax rebates for innovation that we undertake in our particular sector? And that's something that can be addressed at an industry level. There's also a question of skills. A lot of innovation does take place because the right engineering skills are available from a technology perspective, the right social skills are available from a community's perspective, the right commercial skills are available from a business model innovation perspective. And those skills are derived ultimately from the education system. How do you interact with universities in the environment, with other training institutions? So these are the kind of common factors that are underlying drivers for the success of an innovation program. And these are sort of first level factors that I think in many cases are quite easy for an industry to come together. I've yet to see an industry that says, we don't want more skilled people, or we want more regulation and more tax. Like those are things that industries don't want. And so it's easy to bring people together. The second kind of phase of building a broader collaborative industry when it comes to innovation is working across the entire value chain. There is a real competitive advantage to successfully innovating, but that advantage kind of only exists between competitor companies. But when you look at things from a kind of vertical value chain perspective, if you are able to innovate together with one of your suppliers or one of your clients, the joint value that you can create up and down the value chain is enormous. And so this for me is one of the key areas, is how do you drive this vertical collaboration within a value chain? And as soon as you start having these small successes, then they end up snowballing into much larger successes and much larger kind of industry R&D programs. It certainly takes a long time, and there always will be, and there needs to be, a healthy amount of competition. Otherwise, you just end up in, these sort of monopolistic organizations. So you'll never have everyone collaborating, but it's around finding the right areas to work together, and in many cases working up and down the value chain, as opposed to trying to do it with peer or competitor organizations.
Davis, I want to make this a little bit practical for our listeners. So from what you've shared now on how innovation can be fostered in industry, you've previously shared an example of an innovation challenge that was launched in the mining innovation cluster. Do you actually maybe mind speaking and sharing that example with the listeners? It always just rings true to me, like it's such a good example of a collaborative approach and seeking a new way of solving problems.
Sure, I'd be happy to say. We ran a program called the Isidingo Drill Challenge. And the way this unfolded is that we had been talking to a number of mining companies here in South Africa about some of the critical issues that they were facing in sort of achieving their production targets. And one of those issues, particularly from a health and safety perspective, was the fact that rock drills, which is the primary tool used by many of South Africa's underground deep level gold and platinum miners, are essentially a technology that haven't changed in 100 years. They are extremely heavy devices. They weigh over 30 kilos. They're incredibly loud, 110, 115 decibels. There's significant vibration that happens when you use them. And no one had really put the significant time and effort to innovate on these pieces of technology. And so we worked firstly with the end users, so the mining companies themselves, the actual drill operators, the managers, to figure out what an ideal piece of equipment and kit would look like. We then ran an open design and innovation challenge where we asked people to come up with new approaches to achieving the same goal, which is essentially drilling a hole into a rock face, and then come up with new solutions for that. And so we took this challenge from the companies back to the design community to look for new innovations. So we're moving into a different part of the value chain, and then started working with the equipment manufacturers in the sector about how to actually bring this to commercial reality. And as it stands at the moment, there are two particular designs that are in testing, in test mines and test production environments at the moment. And those results, once they sort of come out within the next actually couple of months, will then be used to sort of move into a proper commercial production run. So what we've done here is we've said, instead of the mining company is not an engineering, equipment manufacturer, but they have insight into what the problem is, and they sit at one point in the value chain. We were able to bring out their challenges and communicate it to other parts of the value chain. And this was done together with an organization called the Mandela Mining Precinct and Minerals Council South Africa. And they acted essentially as neutral facilitators of this entire process. So what we managed to do is get a collection of mining organizations who all face a common challenge, which is we're using 50-year-old technology, and it isn't healthy, it isn't safe, and it isn't as productive as we would like it. We, through this neutral organization of the Mandela Mining Precinct, we raised this challenge to a broad design community, and then we managed to bring it all the way back into the engineering, manufacturing group, which is the last component of the value chain, and then into a testing process. And that's kind of how we built this much bigger value chain approach across multiple stakeholders to address a common industry problem.
Greatness. That really actually sounds like a lot of fun. And it just must be amazing to go through that process and seeing the results of a collaborative effort across so many stakeholders. In our roadmap for the Saldanha Bay Innovation Campus, we are planning to launch a similar innovation challenge this year. Davis, have you given any thought of some of the interesting challenges that we may be able to solve in the maritime and energy cluster? Just anything that's top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some really great questions around this. I think that there are some very big industry problems. How do you understand the quality of water that you're engaging with, for example, on board ships? How do you understand the current integrity of ship hulls? There's questions around onboard energy and energy management. There's questions around communication, like how do you effectively communicate with ships that are off to shore in a way that doesn't utilize significant data, like satellite data is expensive. How do you understand maritime security, which is in terms of like illegal fishing? So I think that there are all sorts of challenges that the industry faces, and exciting journey to see where it goes. When we ran the Sidingo Drill Challenge, we really had very little idea of what the outcome would look like. And that's one of the exciting things of running these kinds of innovation programs, that it's never about what do I think the solution can be, but is really just creating a space in which incredibly smart teams of people come up with ideas that you hadn't even imagined. But seeing them in hindsight, you kind of realize, snap, of course, it's so obvious. But I never thought about it. And that's kind of the beauty of these challenges.
Thank you, Davis. I'm sitting and reflecting now here how to best summarize everything that you've shared thus far. It's been a lot of information, a lot of insights, and really helping just to demystify this thing called innovation. And I'm going to try my best at this, and please, at any time, you're welcome to give your input. I think the first thing that stood out was that from what you've described today is that innovation is within the reach of everyone and of any company. And it's something that can be done incrementally. It could be something, a big disruptive trend, or it's simply by doing something better led by science. Then my second takeaway from what you've described, and especially drawing from the work that you've done and other clusters, such as the mining cluster, is that it's a collaborative effort between companies, between academia, between the needs of the community. It's not just something that you're going to think you're going to do on your own. It's everyone really needs to go together. What else would you add? Or is there any other takeaways for you?
No, I think you've summarized it exceptionally well. I think, just to reinforce what you're saying, innovation really is a process. It's something that can be learned, it can be trained and repeated until it's a habit. And as such, it's something that everyone is able to do. You do not have to be an engineering or maths genius to do something, innovative. It's just about seeing a problem and persevering in solving that until it is solved. And in doing so, convincing other people to join you. And I think connected to that is this idea that there are no lone geniuses or innovators that really change the world. Even when we think about these visionary innovators from, whether it's the Steve Jobs of the world or the Bill Gates, all these people that are often held to be these great visionaries. Apple has thousands of engineers. Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX, there are hundreds and thousands of engineers working in these organizations. It's never just one person. So the key here is really, how do you build a coalition of people who are interested in solving the same problems that you are? And when you have this group of people, you are able to support each other, you're able to hold each other to account and really drive this innovation process. I think, if anything, maybe the last sort of comment I'd add is there's a lot of talk about shared value, about, as we do things better, this is all part of like a broader effort to have impact and shared value. My question is, who are you sharing the value with? Because if you try and keep all of it to yourselves, then that is not a shared process. And ultimately, I think that that's going to impact on the success of any innovation process. But when people are able to share in the value created through new innovation, whether those people are your employees, whether they are the communities that you work within, whether they are your customers, whether they are your suppliers, the more that everyone is able to share in the value creation through innovation, the more that they will support the process themselves. And that's just an amazing positive feedback loop. And so that for me is the real magic behind this innovation journey.
Thanks, Davis. And absolutely on the shared value. There's one more point that I also, as you were talking, that I was thinking, my goodness, what we need is a fresh pair of eyes. Innovation is a new mindset that you need to take on. And I want to say tongue in cheek is that you need to wake up in the morning and you need to put on your innovation goggles. And when you look at the world, instead of starting to see problems, it's more about seeing the opportunities in those challenges and looking for solutions. I think here's to a year ahead of us on waking up and putting on our innovation goggles and really just keeping it incremental and within reach of everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a great perspective to have. And yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing journey that the Innovation Campus is going on. And I look forward to being part of a shared value that we create through this road.
Amazing, Davis. Again, thank you so much for your time today and for the discussions that we have. And I'm sure we're still going to have many more discussions during the course of the year and start to celebrate some of the small wins that we're making towards establishing the Innovation Campus and this network and platform for the maritime and energy sector. Then also a big thank you to our listeners today and for tuning in. We are super keen to hear your thoughts, any suggestions on next topics or companies, businesses, anyone that we can interview. In the next series or the next podcast, we're going to explore the theme of innovation a little bit further, looking through a different lens. And a reminder to please share, follow, like, and engage on our social media platforms via Twitter and LinkedIn on the SBIDZ page or the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. Thank you and have a brilliant day further.
If you have any thoughts or questions on this episode or any ideas for future podcasts, please send us an email at innovationcampus@sbidz.co.za. Until next time, let's innovate the blue.